I want to welcome Josh Hammer onto the show next. He's a senior editor-at-large at Newsweek, host of the Josh Hammer Show. Josh, welcome to the Charlie Kirk Show. How you doing?
Andrew, I'm doing great, my friend. It is morning in America, as a famous man once said about 4.5 decades ago, and it's really great to be back on the Charlie Kirk Show with you, my good friend Andrew Colvin.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I'm so glad to have you. There's just so much to discuss, but the real impetus for this was your op-ed in Newsweek, and I thought it was a really, really fun title for an op-ed. First of all, the Cold Civil War is over. We won. Now, Josh, I want you to make your argument here, but I just want to say I'm not popping champagne just yet. There's a lot of work to do, but I think the premise of your article holds. Why do you say we won the Cold Civil War? What is the Cold Civil War? Make your case.
Andrew, let me first say that the fact that the enemy is slayed, at least for the time being, I agree, does not necessarily mean that it will not one day, God forbid, possibly rise like a phoenix from the ashes to create more chaos and mayhem and to sow the seeds of discourse here in America. So while I am definitely celebrating, I agree that we should not rest on our laurels. It is definitely time to keep the momentum going. But the reason that I picked this very fun title, I'm glad you agree with me, I thought it was a very fun title as well, is that what we've seen thus far in the opening week or so of the second Donald Trump administration is the most transformative cultural paradigm shifting moment that I think we've seen probably in our lifetimes. And basically in the column, Andrew, I take a step back. Barack Obama declared war on America. He declared war on America and instituted our modern American Civil War, our cold civil, roiling cold Civil War. This happened because Barack Obama basically said that he was doing it. He famously said in February 2008 that he sought to fundamentally transform America, and one does not seek to fundamentally transform that which he loves or seeks to conserve. And we saw this time and time again throughout the Obama presidency, whether it came to Obamacare, the largest entitlement since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, when it came to the issue of beating up on cops, of exacerbating racial relations, of having Eric Holder, his attorney general, use so-called disparate impact theory. That was kind of the predecessor to Ibram X. Kendi and anti-racism, whether it was all the foreign policy nonsense with the Iran deal. Barack Obama tried time and time again to declare war on the half of America that he infamously called bitter clingers, that Hillary Clinton in 2016 referred to as deplorables. And that civil war was stopped for 4 years by the Donald Trump administration, or at least 3.5 years or so, until George Floyd met Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we all saw what happened from there, the riots of the summer of 2020 and there. And then we got peak woke. The past 4 years prior to Donald Trump getting back in the Oval Office, the Joe Biden presidency, this was peak woke, Andrew, peak woke. He literally chose a vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, because she was a quote-unquote woman of color. He literally chose his one justice on the United States Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, because she is a quote-unquote woman of color. Time and time again, as folks like Chris Rufo have reported, they weaponize all of the various instrumentalities of the American administrative state and executive branch to implement so-called DEI, to overtly discriminate against white people, against Christians, Jews, Asians, in favor of blacks, Hispanics, and so forth there. And just basically everything that we saw over the past 4 years, this was the moment that woke reached, I think, its apotheosis. It's been slayed. It's been slayed because Donald Trump, Andrew, adopted a mentality, to go back to the Morning in America line that I was saying a few minutes ago. He adopted an old Reaganite mantra. And what Ronald Reagan famously said when he was asked for his approach to the Cold War, and he came into power in 1980, coming off the 1970s, you had differing opinions in the 1970s. There was Henry Kissinger and détente. There was kind of the Cold War hawks back then. Ronald Reagan famously said that his approach to the Cold War, we win and they lose. People said that he was crazy, that he was a cowboy, he was a warmonger. But that mentality, Andrew, helped win the Cold War. I think Donald Trump has taken that exact same mentality to his second term in office. And I'm not entirely sure what the exact moment was that galvanized him to adopt this Reaganite mantra. I suspect it was probably around the time that Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, and so-called special counsel Jack Smith started to incarcerate him, to prosecute him, try to throw him in jail, bankrupt him, ruin him of all his possessions, basically deprive him of his liberty and his livelihood. Maybe it was around the time that Thomas Matthew Crooks in Butler, Pennsylvania came within millimeters of assassinating him before a global television audience. But at some point, Donald Trump had kind of his Clarence Thomas 1991 Anita Hill moment, where he looked at all this radicalization around him and said, you know what? This is enough. I am over this. And you know what? To quote Barack Obama, get me my freaking pen, get me my freaking phone, because this crap ain't going to fly anymore come day one. And that was what we saw last week, Andrew. We saw all these executive orders. I mean, the DEI executive order alone, just focusing on that one executive order, and there's been so many amazing ones, it's hard to know even where to start. There's been the gender ideology, birthright citizenship. It's amazing stuff coming out of this White House. But just the DEI executive order, it doesn't just get rid of DEI in the executive branch. It actually goes way past that. It instructs the Attorney General and the Secretary of Education, the whole cabinet, to enforce Title VI and to interpret the Supreme Court's affirmative action case, Students for Fair Admissions, so as to effectively ban DEI in any taxpayer support institution in America. This is the kind of stuff that wins culture wars overnight. So again, let's not rest on our laurels. I understand, constant vigilance, and let's keep our foot on the gas pedal and keep on plowing full speed ahead. But for now, what we have seen is the stuff of legends, frankly. It kind of reminds me, as I said in the column, I remember when I was a kid learning about how the English took over what was then called New Amsterdam, and then they renamed it New York City from Peter Stuyvesant to the Dutch in the 1600s. They famously took it over without firing a single shot, because it was just a pure, unmitigated demonstration of force, and the enemy yielded at that demonstration of force. That's very much how I view what happened over this past week.
I think that was extraordinarily well said, Josh. And I want to believe that all of this is going to happen without a single shot. I mean, there's a lot of reason to believe that we have now become the dominant force in culture, and not just politically, which obviously we control the three branches of the government, but culturally, philosophically, ideologically. You can feel the momentum behind more of a traditional Americana, this triumphant Americana, this manifest destiny, whether it be Greenland or Panama or Canada, or just retaking the border. Pete Hegseth saying, yeah, we're going to get operational control of our southern border. You've got ICE raids. We are, from a PR standpoint, this administration is doing a fantastic job projecting strength to the world. You saw this with Colombia and the little tiff that happened over the weekend, how quickly that was resolved, and then and on and on and on it goes. And I what I find particularly instructive and encouraging, Josh, is the polling. You've got Harry Enton at CNN going on in front of, Casey Hunt or whatever the host is, going like, hey, these numbers are extraordinary. And just for our audience's sake, consider this. Donald Trump is the only president in the history of the country that has a higher approval rating at the start of his second term than he ever did in his first term. A majority of all Americans support deportation of all, not some, not the worst first, which obviously Tom Homan, budget constraints, manpower constraints, is starting with the worst first, but a majority, a clear majority across like 5 different polls say that Americans support deporting all illegals. This is a phenomenal showing, and it shows, Josh, that the Main Street America, average America, is seeing the changes already, are seeing the momentum shift, and American malaise is out. America's self-constraint is out. And so I do want to be really, really encouraged by this. There's a part of me that just, I think can't get over the trauma of 2020 or 2022 and won't quite believe it. But Josh, do you think this has staying power? Do you think we are at the beginning of an 12-year run?
I do. I absolutely do. I think that J.D. Vance as Vice President of the United States is kind of the natural heir to the throne, and we'll obviously have that debate, I presume, in the year 2028. But God willing, the next 4 years will go well, and J.D., who is literally only 40 years old, is kind of the logical successor there. And that's part of the reasons that Donald Trump tapped J.D. Vance in the first place, right? Because he's making a long-term play here. But I mean, look at his cabinet picks. I mean, you mentioned Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is what, 44, 45 years old? I mean, so many of these cabinet picks are very, very young people. This is a movement, Andrew. And what's so fascinating is that MAGA, America First, just being on the right of center right now in America, more generally speaking, this is cool. I mean, this is kind of the anti-establishment mentality, the same way that Barack Obama was considered irreverent. And back in the 1960s, all the quote unquote self-professed cool kids, were burning down college campuses, the Vietnam War, all that stuff. MAGA is basically that today. I mean, this is kind of the middle finger to the establishment. The Democratic Party is a rotting carcass. It is filled with octogenarians, septuagenarians, people who are literally 2 to 3 decades past their prime. Joe Biden's obviously a perfect encapsulation of that there. And the Republican Party is filled with young, up-and-coming people who have an inherent love of their country there. And that's being reflected in the popular culture. Look at all the people in these NFL playoffs and the college football playoffs who are doing the Trump dance in the end zone after getting a touchdown. Carrie Underwood going a cappella at the inaugural address there.
Oh, that was amazing.
So many cultural moments. Yeah. And these big tech oligarchs, I mean, just on and on.